We're closing the third chapter of Kiddushin. We're transitioning, we're bridging into the fourth chapter, which is not only the last chapter of Kiddushin, but it's the last chapter of the whole order of Nashim, the whole order of women, or relationships between women and men. And it's very interesting that the fourth chapter, so when we're going to close the order of Nashim, the fourth chapter is focused on relationships and genealogy, how we trace genealogy through. And so the end of the third chapter, as if it's bridging into this closing, these closing words, the end of the third chapter starts to get into these questions of genealogy. So we have now finished our discussions about how you make a betrothal, how you exchange Kiddushin, what the conditions are, what if you appoint an agent. And we're going into questions of relationships. And the Mishnah begins. So we're in the 12th Mishnah now, in the third chapter of Kiddushin. Wherever there are Kiddushin, so wherever there's a betrothal, and there's no transgression, the status of the child goes after the status of the father. And the Mishnah is going to ask, well, hang on, what does this mean? What are we talking about here? Zo kohenet levia v'Israelit shenis'u la kohen ve'la levi u'Israel. This is the daughter of a priest or a Levi or an Israelite married to a priest or a Levi or an Israelite. In other words, the Mishnah is saying that the daughter of a priest has got the status of a priest. The daughter of a Kohen can eat truma. But when she marries somebody else, not only does she change status, but her children change status. So if the daughter of a priest marries a regular Israelite, her children take on the status of the Israelite father. And it works the other way too. If an ordinary Israelite woman marries a Kohen, her children take on the status of the Kohen. So in other words, to a certain extent, we follow patrilineal descent, at least in terms of status. But the Mishnah will continue. Let's carry on. Wherever there's Kiddushin, but there's transgression, whenever there is Kiddushin and transgression, the child goes after the flawed parent. So what are we talking about? Almana Kohen Gadol, Grusha v'chalutza l'Kohen Ediot, Mamzeret u'netina l'Yisrael uvat Yisrael mamzer v'natin. When a widow is married to a high priest, so in that case, the child is a halal. It doesn't have the status of a high priest. Or a divorced woman or a chalutza to an ordinary priest. Again, the child doesn't have the status of an ordinary priest. Or a mamzeret or a netina to an Israelite. The mamzer, we'll learn about a mamzeret in a minute. Netina is a non-Jew to an Israelite. And the netina l'Yisrael, well, we'll come back to this. We'll come back to this in a sec. And netina is someone who's not necessarily Jewish. We'll have to come back to this. Uvat Yisrael mamzer natin, and the daughter of an Israelite to a mamzer or a natin, and the daughter of an Israelite to a mamzer or a natin, and the offspring is going to be a mamzer or natin. And we'll see, by the way, that the halakha, as we go through this Mishnah, we'll see halakha is still developing. It's still moving. Let's just keep going. We'll see why. B'chol shemi she'ein la'alav kiddushin. Any person. This is now a female person. The previous Mishnah, the earlier part of the Mishnah said v'chol makom, and wherever. And now we seem to be referring to women. V'chol mi she'ein la alav kiddushin. and any woman who can't contract Kiddushin. Aval yesh la Kiddushin al acherim. So she can't contract Kiddushin with that person, but she can contract with another person. It's an interesting definition. I'm not sure how far it takes us. And the Mishnah rules Haveled Mamzer. The child is a Mamzer. But then it explains Ve'ezazeh. And what case is this? And maybe the explanations are clearer than the general rule. This is someone who has intercourse with any relationship which is prohibited in the Torah. So in other words, if you had a relationship with a married woman, I guess she could in theory contract Kiddushin with another person, although in this case she has contracted Kiddushin with another person, and the child is a mamzer. And the Mishnah concludes, any woman who cannot contract Kiddushin at all, doesn't have the ability to contract Kiddushin, and not with that person or not with any person, the child follows her status. And this is, what case is this? The child of a slave girl or a female Gentile. In other words, in this case, we are going to follow matrilineal descent. So in other words, a Jewish man who has a relationship with a non-Jewish woman, the status of the children is they're non-Jews. And the Rambam, the Mishnah doesn't make this clear, but the Rambam in his commentary makes it clear. And he quotes two different verses. It said of the slave girl, this is a slave girl who's actually leaving, she's actually leaving slavery with her children. And it says, the woman and her children. Somehow children are grouped with her. The Rambam says the child is like her. And then we're going to bring now a verse about marriage to idolaters. And the text says, this is also from the Parsha Mishpatim, I think, Ki asir et bincha me'achorai. This relationship with the idolater will draw your son away from me. And the Rambam says, Bincha mi-Israelit karui bincha, your son from a Jewish mother. Now we have matrilineal descent. Your son from a Jewish mother is called your son. Ve'ein bincha ba mina ovedet kochavim karui bincha. Ela b'na. Your son from an idolatrous woman. This is a Jew who has a relationship with a non-Jew. This person is not called your son, but rather her son. The status of this child follows the status of his mother. And the Mishnah doesn't make it clear, but we can see both patrilineal and matrilineal descent flowing through this Mishnah. We can see from this Mishnah the source of our current practice of determining a child's Jewish status via its mother. And then a tiny coda, but again, a bridge to the next section on genealogy and relationships. Rabbi Tarfon says, Rabbi Tarfon Omer, Yecholim he mamzerim lehitaher, or litaher. Rabbi Tarfon says, a mamzer can be purified. And the Mishnah asks, Keitzad, how does it work? And it answers, Mamzer noseh shifcha, haveled eved. A mamzer marries a slave girl. Her son is a slave. Shicharo, if he frees him, his master frees him, nimtza haben ben chorin, the son is a free man. So in one generation, if you like, this is no longer, in other words, the status of mamzer has been lost. And Rabbi Eliezer doesn't agree, by the way. And we've seen Rabbi Eliezer always has a rational but an extreme view, or very often he has a rational but extreme view. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Harei ze eved mamzer. Rabbi Eliezer says he's a slave mamzer, which must be a terrible, terrible situation to be in. And the Rambam comments there, V'halacha Rabbi Tarfon. The halacha is according to Rabbi Tarfon. It is possible to purify a mamzer, and we do not follow Rabbi Eliezer.